Alright, so this FWC site doesn't have all the absolute information about Gulf sturgeon. Very unique species. Majority of Floridians have no idea and or overlook them. Living fossils. I think they're very cool, very worth saving, mentioning, seeing. If you can ever find yourself in the Suwannee River region, it's really not on the way to anything. The upper Suwannee passes I-10, but you really have to drive out there, kind of. Northwest Florida, Big Bend, to go to the lower, middle, and lower Suwannee River in Florida. Florida is where most of the Suwannee River is. Very big, impressive river. Alright, so let's get to it. Gulf sturgeon. Scientific name Accipenser oxyrhynchus desodoi. Federal status threatened, but in 2022, August, they're reclassified as endangered based on a study in 2019. Florida status, federally designated threatened appearance. The Gulf sturgeon, also known as the Gulf of Mexico sturgeon, is one of 7 species of sturgeon found in North America. Sturgeon species are prehistoric species that date back to the time of the dinosaurs. Sturgeon are popular in the food industry as a source of caviar. They have physical features that separate them from other kinds of fish, such as a spiral valve stomach and cartilaginous skeleton, like sharks and rays. However, they have hard scutes, hard, protective, large individual bony plates, instead of sharks' denticles or bony fish scales. Gulf sturgeon have barbels located on the underside of the snout, no teeth, rubbery lips, and a suctorial mouth for vacuuming food off the bottom. The sturgeon's coloring typically is dark brown along the upper dorsal side, shading to a creamy white colored belly. They are large fish that can exceed a length of 8 feet or 2.4 meters and a weight of over 300 pounds, 137 kilograms, and possess strength to leap up to 9 feet, 2.7 meters into the air. What is there to appreciate about this big fish? Plenty, say scientists who study them. The Gulf sturgeon grows to greater than 6 feet in length, sports bony plates on its head and body, has fleshy whiskers on its long snout, and no internal skeleton. This ancient fish evolved from much larger ancestors that lived more than 225 million years ago. Gulf sturgeon may live up to more than 40 years, not reaching sexual maturity until 7 or 8 years of age or later. Historically, Gulf sturgeon occurred from the Mississippi River east and south to Tampa Bay. Sporadic occurrences were recorded as far west as the Rio Grande River in Texas and Mexico, and a Florida Bay in the east. Their present range extends from Lake Pontchartrain and the Pearl River system in Louisiana and Mississippi, respectively, east to the Suwannee River in Florida. Based on current data, populations continue to reproduce in 7 river systems: Pearl, Pascagoula, Escambia, Yellow, Blackwater, Choctawhatchee, Apalachicola, and Suwannee rivers. In addition to the 7 spawning riverine populations, Gulf sturgeon are also known to inhabit the Mobile and Ohlochnee rivers. Sturgeon are anadromous, a term used to describe fish that spend a part of their lives in salt water, yet travel upstream in freshwater rivers to spawn. Such fish return year after year to the same stream where they hatched, which means a move from salt to freshwater between February and April, and a more downriver between September and November. They spend the winter in the Gulf of Mexico in sandy bottom habitats 6 to 100 feet deep, where their diet consists of marine worms, grass shrimp, crabs, and a variety of other bottom-dwelling organisms. They eat very little while in freshwater rivers. Little is known about the early life stages of the Gulf sturgeon throughout its range. After the late 1800s, Gulf sturgeon populations declined dramatically, a result of the high demand for their delicious meat and valuable roe, and dam construction, dredging activity, and other man-made habitat alterations. The decline prompted state and federal officials to place the sturgeon on the protected species list in the 1980s and 1990s, and to enact a harvesting and possession ban. Today, the free-flowing, spring-fed Suwannee River supports the largest and most robust population of Gulf sturgeon in the state and the wider Gulf of Mexico region. Adults spawn on scoured, lime-straight substrates in the upper reaches of this 200-mile-long river. As they swim along, sturgeon occasionally leap out of the water. Every spring and summer, lucky boaters and campers along the Suwannee River witness this spectacle. Power boaters can reduce the risk of injury to themselves and the fish by boating slower during the appropriate time of year. This also increases the chance of seeing sturgeon and other wildlife along the way. Sturgeon are benthic feeders. They feed on organisms located on the bottom, such as crabs, grass shrimp, lancets, brachiopods, and marine worms. Gulf sturgeon typically course themselves during the fall to spring period when they are in brackish and saltwater habitats. Sturgeon spawn during the spring in freshwater rivers when temperature, flow, and pH are optimal. If conditions are not optimal for a successful spawn, sturgeons will skip that spawning season and absorb their eggs, often waiting 3 years before spawning again. When sturgeon do spawn, the eggs are ejected, fertilized, and rapidly stick to objects that are located in or near the bottom of the river. The egg mass for a mature female sturgeon ranges between 250,000 to 1 million eggs. Eggs hatch roughly 4 days post-spawn when water temperatures range from 61 to 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 16.1 to 17.8 degrees Celsius. Most larvae do not survive due to reasons such as deformity, disease, fungus, predation, lack of food, and ill-timed floods or droughts. Threats. Now that rampant overharvest has been stopped, the main threat to Gulf sturgeon's survival are the dams located on the Gulf seaboard rivers, which prevent sturgeon from reaching historic spawning areas, therefore decreasing the spawning rate of the species. Habitat destruction is also a threat to their populations. Gulf sturgeon habitat has increased vulnerability because they inhabit areas that are at risk of dredging. The dredging of river channels is a practice that can destroy or suffocate sturgeon eggs located on objects in the river. Dredging of rivers also affects the food source of sturgeons as they are bottom feeders. Other threats to sturgeon populations include lethal bycatch and declining water qualities. Water quality can be affected by pollution reaching the floodplains of the river and excessive water withdrawals from rivers. Sturgeon are slow breeders, which makes
any loss of breeders or spawning habitat
a serious
problem
for the species. Of course, Gulf sturgeon aren't the only Florida sturgeon species, which probably most people aren't aware of, that there's the Atlantic sturgeon in the St. Johns River system, or at least they used to be there. Occasionally, they'll find a dead one every few years or so. It seems like much of the same issues. Dredging, especially in the lower St. Johns River. Damming. They dammed up the Ocklawaha River, which many scientists speculate they used to travel up to spawn the Atlantic sturgeon and the short-nosed sturgeon, which they mostly inhabit other areas of the Atlantic coast. But yeah, for sure, the most abundant sturgeon in Florida seems to be the Gulf sturgeon. Here's some more information from NOAA about the threats. Pollution and contamination from industrial, agricultural, and municipal activities is believed to cause a variety of physical, behavioral, and psychological impacts to sturgeon worldwide. Specific impacts include muscle atrophy, abnormal gonad, sperm, egg, and larval development, organ mutations, tumors, and disruption of hormone production. Chemicals and metals often settle to the river bottom and are later incorporated into the food web as they are consumed by benthic feeders such as sturgeon or macroinvertebrates. And also, climate change is also a possible impactor. Global climate changes may lead to accelerated change in sturgeon habitat through saltwater intrusion, changes in water temperature, increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes and red tides, and associated fish kills, exacerbation of the world's largest dead zone where the Mississippi River meets the Gulf of Mexico, and extreme weather periods that could increase both the frequency and intensity of droughts and floods. Of course, no big surprise that they're still thriving or are thriving again in the Suwannee River. That river is very big, has next to no development. Out of all the 5 water management districts in Florida, the least amount of people live in the Suwannee River Water Management District. So you have this big river that's fed by a bunch of springs, and it's not dammed up. So it's really a bunch of win-wins, which, some of the other big rivers either have dams or more pollution or less springs. So there is some point source pollution and non-point source pollution in the Suwannee, don't get me wrong, from human activities. But at the present moment, there's a bunch of springs that usually dilute it out, and it still washes out to the Gulf. I've heard the oyster industry kind of really been impacted, but for the most part, it is a pretty pristine, nice ecosystem that still exists along that river. At least for sturgeon, don't rely on the banks to reproduce, because for much of the river it's been developed some disturbances. But yeah, they require a whole bunch of clean water, a nice estuary. Lowermost Suwannee River is definitely protected. There's a bunch of nice savannas and next to no development. One of the best kayaking trips I ever went was on the lowermost Suwannee River, where it meets the Gulf on Alligator Pass, the main channel, and the East Pass. So how's the outlook for sturgeon looking? Well, better than it used to be. They used to be endangered, designated 1991, and they got designated critical habitat for legal protections in 2002 or 2003. They've definitely rebounded. Around the Suwannee River region have about 14,000 adults. Most other regions only have a few hundred or a few thousand adults in the Gulf. They're definitely better off than many sturgeon worldwide, but definitely not as well off as other species of sturgeon in North America. Of course, they're slow reproducing, reproduce at 8 years of age, more or less. They only have so many successful offspring, and then they have to wait years and years before those reproduce. So they're very vulnerable to extinction. But they're still out there. They're still go to Suwannee River. Many people think they're a menace. I've seen in the news articles there's been 1 fatality so far of people speeding. Most people just only get injured when they're speeding, and even if you're kayaking, it can happen, but that's part of the thrill, I think, that you can see them jump right in front of you because you're in this wild Blackwater River, largely spring fed too, so it's kind of a hybrid river, the Suwannee River. Definitely recommend it. And you just stick your neck out there, but you'll be rewarded if you are persistent enough at the right time of year between May through September before they migrate back into the Gulf. I'm telling you, man. Although the largest factors in their demise, as I've said, are dams, overpollution, dredging. It's really not too much of an issue at present with the Suwannee, but they're definitely protected. So if anybody plans on going out down there and harvesting them, you'll definitely regret that in one way or another. And they're just a super charismatic, really weird, ancient fish that deserves protection and deserves to thrive in even more river systems, in my opinion. And monitoring continues. I'm not sure if I'll make a video. I wouldn't be surprised if I do, on the 5-year report. Recently came out this year, and also ICUN status was changed to endangered. So that's kind of a good thing, more protections, but it is worrisome, perhaps, that they are only thriving in so many regions and are definitely affected by climate change and sea level rise. But I know there's also the sawfish that was definitely exploited in the past, but I don't think those jump, so you're not going to dependably see those unless you're fishing, scuba diving, or there's definitely more pollution, red tide issues down there, so I don't know how their future's looking. But to see that kind of habitat where sturgeon thrive and it still exists somehow in 2021, 2022, and onwards, it's definitely amazing.